Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 298. I'm delighted to welcome back, completing his hat trick, Mr. Warren Bradley. How are we doing?
I'm good, mate. How are you guys doing?
Very good. Very good. Anyone watching will also see that I'm joined by my co-host, Jordan Tyra. Jordan, how's things?
Good, thanks. Yep, glad to be back.
Good, man. You're getting a bit of a run now on the podcast, aren't you?
I know, yeah, it's getting nosebleed territory now. I don't know what's going on.
I know, yeah. I know. It's good. It's good. No, Warren, it's great to have you back on, mate. We've obviously been having a little bit of a catch up before we got going, but I know there's loads to dive into. For anyone that hasn't listened to our previous episodes, we'll link them in the show notes below because we've already done a couple of episodes on the sort of introduction to blood flow restriction and also to Hytro. We went into a bit more around the research in the second episode, which I know you might give a little update on some of the things that you guys have been up to. But now there's even more going on. So it'll be great to dive into it. So do you want to just start with a bit of a broad catch up, just an update on what's been going on at Hytro?
Yeah, no problem at all. Gosh, where do I start? Since last, was it July, June last year, did we say?
Yeah,
So,
June.
over a year. Gosh, so we're in over 150 teams around the world supporting a lot of different sports now in the NFL and the NBA, NHL. So it's growing quickly over in the US, which is amazing to see. Product innovation is always ongoing in the background, so you should see some things dripping through in the next couple of years, which are really exciting. We'll speak about one in a bit, but Hytro in space, which is pretty incredible. And also, yeah, we're just through the research now with 22 research studies either completed or ongoing, we're really finding niche USP kind of types of ways to use BFR where you couldn't do it before because the products were cumbersome, complex. And it's really just extending new opportunities for teams around the world to explore BFR and get performance advantages. So we can talk about a few of those today, but that's really, foot to the gas on the moment, trying to unpick new and wonderful ways to benefit athletes and teams.
I'm really intrigued by some of the protocols and the sort of update on research around protocols because every time I post on our Instagram using the shorts, using the shirt, I'll always get messages from people going, what do you actually do in terms of the recovery, the timings of the protocols that are used, or if it's more of a hypertrophy focus, what are you actually doing? Sets, reps, give me more information. So you must get a hell of a lot in terms of the stuff that you put out. What have been some of the updates around that? So starting more on the, I suppose, the performance side. So coming to recovery in a little bit, but on the performance side for hypertrophy, for rehab, for all these areas that we've spoke about previously for BFR, what are the updates in terms of protocols that have been used and been successful as well?
With regards to the protocols, they haven't changed that much from existing literature. It's been around for decades, right? So the BFR protocols are well established. It's more about where it's being used in the utility. So where before it was kind of stuck in a rehab room or in clinic, typically you couldn't really send an athlete home with BFR because it's unsafe to use without supervision. But because of Hytro, you can now send athletes home. So we're seeing more utility with things like resistance banded work at home. You can do like literally before bed or on the sofa while you're playing on your phone or watching TV. You can kick back, strap in your shorts, and do some BFR. So it's more about behavior change and actually the versatility of BFR versus traditionally used methods. But the protocols are very much the same in that regard. I will say, segueing into recovery, we're trying to simplify it as much as possible now because we've realized there's so many different ways you can benefit from BFR. It gets confusing. So when people ask you, how are you using it? We've really just bottomed out the bell curve of the science to work out what is optimal for most people. And that is 3 rounds of 5 minutes of BFR applied with approximately 2 minutes of rest in between. It's a 19-minute protocol, but that can now span across all activity and all passive use. So whether that's on a bike, whether that's walking, whether that's sat down at rest, whether that's doing stretching, mobility, it's still 3 lots of 5 minutes with 2 minutes off. There will be evidence of research to show specific protocols across all of those areas, but we've realized quickly that they all work and they're all pretty effective. So actually, let's just keep it simple so the mass market can actually enjoy BFR. And because of our product being safe and effective without supervision, it's a very easy on-ramp and accessible now to do BFR.
Warren, just on the US sports that you mentioned before, I feel like we can learn quite a lot in terms of their travel schedule, because it's pretty grueling in terms of the amount of travel they do. We think we've got it bad here, but it doesn't scratch the surface, does it, on what they actually do? So with your work, again, on the recovery side now, you've mentioned the ease of use in terms of strapping in, whether that's on the team bus after the game, in the changing rooms, wherever the players are utilizing it. Is there anything that you've learned that maybe you could pass on to coaches working in Europe and the UK, lessons from other sports and the schedules that they face in the US?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. So it depends on the sport, depends on the team. Obviously, there's always different logistics and barriers and different environments you're working within. But let's say post-competition, we're seeing a lot of teams now adopt it in an immediate fashion. So in the changing rooms straight away post-game. And that is because it's so quick and simple to throw them on, and you can do it whilst doing something else. So for example, you're having some food, you can be strapped in or walking around while doing that. Having a meeting or having a debrief post-game with the manager, for example, you can be strapped in while doing that, as opposed to, an ice bath. You can't be in an ice bath while the manager's speaking to you, or other modalities. So yeah, we're finding post-game is really increasing, but also the travel. You're right. Like on flights, that's becoming a really common utility of the product. Previously, and I think on our first podcast, it might have been the second even, I mentioned something to do with flights and potentially not doing it on a flight initially because we didn't have the research to back it. Having spoken to a lot of NBA, NFL teams, and actually some Premier League teams, they're doing BFR already on flights. And my rationale was, we didn't know what happened at altitude, but actually on a flight, you're in a pressurized cabin. So the actual problem on flights is the lack of movement and mobility, because you get more stagnant. So you're in a 90-degree knee angle for a prolonged period of time. You get lymph and swelling kind of build up. The BFR, or particularly with Hytro, is so incredibly good for just creating a powerful flush. So swelling the cells, releasing and flushing that lymph and that fluid from the area. So we're now starting to see that adopted quite widely, particularly for long haul, but also for short plane travels. I will say about the US market too, I've been quite impressed. So from the very beginning of this journey, I've been speaking to colleagues who've moved over into, NFL, NBA and whatnot. You probably know some of them. And they've been trying to use BFR for recovery, but they've had to buy like Delphi systems for 12, 15 grand and have them next to physio beds, and then cycle players through maybe 10 of these units, which is, for the record, cost prohibitive to most teams over here in the UK. And they're already doing this, but it takes them 2 hours to recover their athletes. Whereas with our product, we can do everyone in 15 minutes. So they've already tried to innovate in the US, but they just didn't have the product to do it effectively. So now that we've come in, it's been a really quick and easy onboarding session because they're already trying. They just now have the product to access it, which is a bit different to the UK, I would say.
100%. Jordan, have you got anything on that? Because obviously we spoke before about you being in a role at a club most recently out of the three of us. So in terms of that ease of recovery for players, what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, I think everything Warren just said there is key, essentially, isn't it? Because, if you've got the access to an equipment or a tool that you can do while you're still doing something else, I think that's major. Because even if you've got players who, let's say, played 60 minutes, don't need to do post-match runs, but some players are doing post-match runs. Some players are just straight in debrief. Some players might need to do some post-match top-ups in terms of the gym or some eccentric work. You have, as the practitioner, if the S&C coach overseeing those players, you're stretched in a few multiple places. So like Warren just said there, historically, if you were to try and implement some recovery tools, you're probably going to have to be with those people in an ice bath. Like I remember previously in some of the roles I used to do, you have to oversee players, hot, cold bath, and you're trying to oversee them. So now if you've got a tool to go, actually, I can give you the shorts, off you go. I'll stay with the runners. You guys can go straight into debrief and stuff. It is really essential. I do see that as a massive benefit. My question to you, Warren, was going to be, you kind of alluded to it, to be fair. How have you seen different countries uptake this now? Now, obviously, like you said, onboarding in the US was much easier because I think they're always, the sense I get is they're looking for innovation and ways to find those extra 1%. Now that obviously, with 3 podcasts in with the hat trick, are clubs much better at taking it in this country now? Are we kind of like, yes, we need that, we want that because other clubs are doing it, or is there still a bit of resistance? You know, what's the lay of the land?
No, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's taken a while, but we're pretty much mass adopted in the UK now. But I have noticed there was a lot more skepticism here, purely because I think, and from my own practice, I was the same. I was very much science driven and science led, and had to have enough evidence in place before I'd on board with something. We now have that with Hytro. We have 2 publications on safety and efficacy, 150 teams, most of the Premier League, NASA, which we'll come to shortly. But we have all this incredible validation now that it's kind of, you can't really deny the impact of this product. So at this point, it's more, just onboarding with education. Like, how could you possibly use a product? Does it suit your environment? There's a green tick on safety and efficacy. It's more about, does it fit you and your logistical barriers and environment? So yeah, that did take some time, and it is quicker in the US. We're getting quicker sales cycles, bigger sales, much bigger teams, much bigger budgets. So that's why we're seeing growth there is pretty exponential. Here it's been a slower burn, but I mean, of those 150, 100 are UK teams. So we have mass penetration of the UK now, which is amazingly humbling for me coming from UK sports, to be fair. I want to speak to a point on recovery as well, which really excites me. Like Ben and Jordan, you both know I came from a nutrition background. My PhD was in exercise phys and nutrition. And we recently found a paper from 2019 by a guy called Christiansen, and he was looking at glucose uptake with BFR into the leg, and it enhanced glucose uptake significantly by transporting it through the GLUT4 transporter, so the shuttling. So if you take that into a recovery setting where muscle glycogen resynthesis is one of the crucial components of recovery, particularly with a quick turnaround, BFR should hypothetically, based on this research, drive through reperfusion better glucose absorption to the tissue, therefore quicker resynthesis of energy, right? So taking that a step further and looking at the molecular size of glucose versus proteins and amino acids, very similar. So it stands to reason that BFR can also drive that into the tissues. And just to give you a visual analogy, it's quite a powerful way of explaining it. Imagine a dish sponge like that you clean dishes with, right? And squeeze it and plunge it in water, then let go. It absorbs quickly. If you just put it in the water, it won't absorb as efficiently. So think of your muscle tissues under BFR like a sponge that's been squeezed. Think of your blood then that it's plunging into the water, then let go. So that reperfusion, once you unleash that strap, is driving fresh, nutrient-rich blood into the tissues. So if you onboard a recovery shake, or if you onboard some food that's free floating in the bloodstream, then do BFR, that's going to drive it into tissues. And there's no other mechanism that can achieve that. That's not the same as compression. That's not the same as lymphatic drain. It's a very specific mechanism with BFR. So we're now seeing teams adopt that as a protocol post-game. Recovery shake, then BFR, because as soon as it's in the bloodstream, we can drive that into tissues more effectively. Therefore, quicker resynthesis, quicker recovery. And we are doing a research study, or it's in planning, with ManMet to look at that under muscle biopsies, so properly in a lab, and actually look at nutrient uptake into tissues with BFR, which is, I think, is game changing. If we can synergize BFR with nutrition, it's no longer just BFR, it's a whole new thing. It's a nutrient delivery system. Take that into drug administration, take it into all sorts of areas. So that's really exciting. And that's not just recovery. Think pre-game or pre-competition when you need to drive glucose into the tissues, right? Or creatine, or instead of loading for days on nitric oxides and things like that, if it can do it acutely by driving it into tissues, this is a complete hypothesis for the record. Don't know if it's true. But if we find that to be true, BFR becomes something very different. It becomes a delivery system. And that's that's just what gets my mind excited, I guess.
I think that's really exciting, isn't it? Even as you were speaking there, I'm working privately with a few ACL clients and stuff like that, and I'm thinking of the adaptations and the recovery straight post session. If we really trying to push stuff, muscle growth around the quad and everything, off straight after that, then you can get, like you say, just that instant impact. That's really exciting, isn't it? That's interesting to see where it's going to go. My question on this now, because I think we're now seeing, I'm guessing when you first brought this to the UK market, people were like, yeah, we'll give it a go, we'll try it out, we'll see how it is. Now it's become much more integrated, like you say. Are you now hearing from clubs that, you know, we have a standardized match day protocol, like you just said, a recovery protocol after a match. It goes this with BFR, and it really works for us. Have you now found a kind of developed model as a kind of emerged, or has it kind of been as you predicted, or is it as you kind of suggested to them? Has it just become quite natural?
Yeah, I think because we're an education company first and foremost that deliver BFR as a product, teams are very open to like speak with me about programming and understanding how it best suits their logistics and environment. And we are seeing that now. You know, I've seen many different clubs with different versions of it, but the periodized model of Hytro BFR within their recovery session, whether that's the acute recovery post match play or whether that's the regen sessions, game day +1 and 2. And there's different ones, absolutely. And I do have a slide deck that I take teams through to show them options and like what other teams do in different sports. And they might pick one from here, one from here, and one from there that suit their environment. But typically the most common is at the start of a recovery session, you pop on the shorts. So when they come into the club setting, because when they're in the off position, there is no BFR applied, it's just a pair of compression shorts. They can choose to activate the BFR at any stage during their recovery session. Therefore, if you have, say, a menu or a suite of options, which many teams do, you know, bike flush, mobility, plyometric, stretching, ice baths, contrast, whatever it is, you can apply the BFR at any stage during that, even in the ice baths, which again, we'll come to the research in a second, in your contrast bathing, in your saunas, in your swimming pool. You can just deploy the strap or remove the strap at any time. So the process now is athletes, please do 3 lots of 5 minutes of BFR at some point during your 45 to 1 hour recovery session. And athlete A might absolutely love a bike flush with BFR, so does all 3 rounds of 5 minutes on the bike with BFR because they just love it. Athlete B may say, do you know what? I really like the bike, but I love stretching with it too. And I actually quite like the cold plunge. They'll split it into 3 5s, but they'll still complete the whole 15-minute bike flush. They'll just do 5 minutes of the bike flush under BFR. And there's nothing stopping them from doing a 4th round of 5 minutes. We have just found from research that there's a diminishing rate of return, and we believe 3 to be optimal. But there's subjectivity to be considered here. If an athlete loves it and wants to do 4 rounds and wants to do it across stretching, mobility, bike flush, and ice baths, fine. Allow them to do that, right? Because they'll feel better. So yeah, the common practice now is pull them on, give the athlete autonomy. They pick when they apply the BFR throughout the session, and it's 3 lots of 5 minutes. There are other teams like Everton. They've mandated the use of BFR, of Hytro BFR while walking. The reason they've done that is, number one, Jack Dowling obviously has really bought into the product since 4 years ago. He's been a huge advocate for us, but they already did the walk around the pitch. That's something that they traditionally did and do. And because of that, they might as well extract more recovery gain from that walk. So why not wear the shorts and strap in at the same time? So there's no time burden. It's the same time frame, but you're getting an additional physiological stimulus from that walk, right? So it makes logical sense to actually employ it in that way or deploy it in that way.
That alone, when you implement anything new into a routine, is so much easier, isn't it? When you implement it into a existing strategy, like you gave the example of Everton there. And I think like that's what Jordan was saying, that each club will be slightly different, won't they, in terms of what they do? Like forgetting about recovery, just the way they operate is going to be slightly different. So the way that it works for them in terms of BFR and recovery is always going to be slightly different, isn't it? So I really like the fact that you've got the examples now of what other clubs are doing. You can take different aspects of it, make it work for you, but it all falls back to that 3-5 minutes. And then it makes it basically a checklist, doesn't it? Yes, I've done them, or no, I haven't.
We want to make BFR accessible. That is our ultimate goal with the business, whether that's education, whether that's through products, whether that's through the services that we provide to teams and in health and in military and other areas we work. It's not about the product. It's about education and making it accessible for everyone. And that's what we're trying to do. That's why we're innovating with research. That's why you can hear me get excited about like nutrition and BFR. No one's ever done this. We're really at the kind of pointy end of the spear of research, trying to lead the way and say, what about this? There's a hypothesis here. The science makes sense, but we need to test it and prove it. And I think the great thing about professional sports in the modern era is, back 15 years ago when I started, it was very much read a research paper and apply it how it states, typically. Now it's very much people innovating themselves because they understand the sports science side of things. They get the mechanism. They're happy to say, well, it makes sense that that would work. If it's not dangerous, let's try that and see if we can enhance the athlete's experience. And that's what we're seeing. Like the use of BFR in an ice bath was not through Hytro. That was because a team, I think, who was it? St. Helens Rugby League. It was like 2 years ago. Matt Daniels just rang me. He said, "Oh, we use it in contrast bathing, so we use it in the ice and in the hot tub." I was like, "Geez, I didn't even know it was waterproof." He's like, "Yeah, it straps in fine." We're like, "Brilliant," and he said the athletes love it. The lads love the sensation of the cold shock proteins. Obviously, we don't feel them, but you feel the cold, and then obviously the BFR creates swelling, creates the flush that you can feel. So it's a really intuitive kind of physical feeling that you get. So yeah, they bought into that. And then the swimming pool example was from Belgium football team at the World Cup. Again, we just got a video sent to us of the whole team, like Kevin De Bruyne and everyone, in a swimming pool, strapped in with BFR, playing handball. And again, we had no idea it could do that. But because of the products we created, they're so universal and easy to apply, people are innovating themselves, coming to us saying, "We did this. Can you do some research on it for us?" And that's what we're doing. So if you've got any ideas, guys, let me know.
What I'd say is this really nicely links into recent podcasts because we've spoke a lot about strategies that fit into what we currently do. We did one on breath work recently, and that was all about that. It's not anything, you don't need to set up different sessions or anything like that. It's what do you do currently and how can we optimize what you're doing? It's exactly what we're talking about here. And then also, just in terms of, the simplicity of it in a way, isn't it? That you are, this is what we're trying to do. Check that off. And how you do it depends on different scenarios. And it's something we spoke about in our WhatsApp group recently. You probably saw it. There's the difference between research, the practice being based solely on research and experience. And like you mentioned years ago, it's probably you're going to lean on the research side fully without giving any of your sort of experience to it. And now, like you've given examples of there, people are sort of falling somewhere in the middle, aren't they? Saying, right, I understand the science, but this is how we can apply it.
Well, it's one of the functions of our business is to make something complex simple, to bridge the gap between science and research and practice. Because what is the point in having like a really difficult, complex protocol that cannot be applied practically? It's just not meaningful. Like, great, it works in a lab, but we're not going to apply that to a professional athlete because it's impossible. So where's the mid ground? Like, yeah, okay, let's lose a bit of specificity and gain a heap of practicality, and actual the implications that will have on practice are huge, right? And that's the same with like the pressure on our devices. I know I've probably mentioned it on previous podcasts, but at the end of the day, we've now provided an objective range that you will be sat within for percent of occlusion pressure and milligrams of mercury of skin pressure. Because we have that, we know it's one, safe because it's subocclusive, and two, safe because it's in the right position. So we're not specific to the 1% LOP, but we're within a range. But what that unlocks is practical use of BFR. We almost say, green tick, throw that pressure stuff to the side. Now, what can we do? What can we achieve with BFR moving forward in innovation? And that's where we sit in the practical application of BFR.
I think that's just going back to what Ben said there as well, like previous discussions we've had, going back to Barry Drust, Ben at West Brom. And we were talking about is research actually sometimes hampering our innovation? I don't know if it's a technological thing, because if you were to say, I don't know, I think the example I gave was Nordics and how they became the done thing, didn't they? And everyone was like, right, we're going to do Nordics, but because of their quite high strain, if you want to call it that, and the DOMS effect of Nordics for somebody who certainly hasn't done it in a long time, people aren't going to go rogue and go off the research. They're not going to suddenly do 4 sets of 10 Nordics with a player because they won't be able to walk or get down the stairs the next day. But I think, like you were saying there, Warren, like because BFR's allowed, certainly Hytro and the shorts, etc., have allowed safe ways of doing it in pretty, like in the pool, like you say, in the plunge baths and all that sort of stuff. You're allowing practitioners almost to take a little bit of innovation in there, and I think that's really important. So kind of not contrasting what Barry was saying, but there are definitely examples where actually practitioners are still trying to be really, really innovative, and I think that's really good to hear, because certainly it was a little bit doom and gloomy when we asked that question. We're saying that sometimes we're working with the handbrake on a little bit, and research. We just kind of stick into the research, and we don't want to venture away from it. Now, you know, like you just said, with those some of those examples, that's a really good call to hopefully a lot of sports scientists, S&C coaches, and the like, just to become like, actually, you know, if it's safe to do so, if it's right to do so, you can still innovate, and you might actually see a really good benefit, like the St. Helens guys were with the shorts in the cold bath. So yeah, I think that's really exciting. I just wanted to make that point.
I appreciate that, man. And a term we use a lot is facilitate the facilitators. So coaches are facilitating, you know, strength adaptations, performance adaptations, recovery, whatever. But if we can facilitate the coach to innovate themselves, it builds them as well. It builds their careers, it builds their confidence, it builds their persona in the industry. Like if some of the first people to adopt BFR in the industry have gone on to some incredible jobs across the Premier League and whatnot, because they're that type of person that's willing to innovate, they're willing to take the plunge. And they're the type of people we love working with because they're collaborating with us. They're helping us learn more about the product to go back. And now we're making waterproof versions of the product for the plunge pool, for the plunge pool for the future, so that the mechanism is even better under the conditions of water, because that's not what it was made for. But that's because someone's innovated first and come to us. And we want to facilitate that and have that cyclical loop where people know to come to us and say, look, I've got this question. Can you guys answer it or help answer it together? Like, there's not many companies you can say you can do that with, I don't think. Like, and I hope that's how we're viewed. I don't know what the optics are from the outside, but I want people to look at Hytro and say, I've got this question. These guys like to do research. It might not even be BFR, just sports science related. But I'll go to Hytro and just see what dots they can connect and what we can do together. That's where we are sat and want to be.
Well, and just take us into some examples, because we're in the preseason period at the minute as we record this. So it'd be great to dive into that, because I know we've spoken about recovery. It's going to be a pretty key time for players to recover in between double sessions, triple sessions, whatever's going on at clubs. So what are some key things to consider in terms of BFR recovery during preseason?
Yeah, really good and timely question. So putting on practitioner hat from working back in the clubs, we always try to not mitigate recovery, but allow the athletes to recover themselves without recovery tools typically. So you would avoid things like cold water immersion, ice baths, because it's known to blunt strength adaptations, for example. I believe there's research to show that it actually enhances endurance adaptation. So there's a trade-off there. Excuse me. However, typically we would avoid high anti-inflammatory foods. We would avoid things like cold water immersion in the preseason. Now, BFR actually doesn't blunt adaptations. It promotes adaptations simultaneous to recovery. So it's actually one of the only recovery modalities that I can think of, perhaps heat could also be in the same category, but where it promotes adaptation, does not blunt adaptation, and promotes recovery simultaneously. So it's something that a lot of teams have started to implement with Hytro BFR of those 150 plus teams that we work with. And it's still early doors, right? This is going to be 3 to 5 years before we see mass adoption in preseason. Quicker, obviously, for in-season, because we already have seen a few years of exponential scale there. But this is new. The traditional thinking is remove recovery tools during preseason to create adaptations yourself. Now, there is another school of thought here as well, and something that I employed with younger athletes and academies, and that is, do you know what? This might be beneficial for recovery, but actually, we want you to drill in on nutrition, sleep, and proper habits, especially for anyone under 18. So there is a school of thought to say the behaviors in preseason are really important for building future athletes. So younger athletes, perhaps preseason, this is just my opinion. I think we drill in on the nutrition and sleep first, educate. But for senior athletes, I think we should consider things like BFR, because the opportunity is there to get extra percentages, to get greater hypertrophy, endurance adaptations, and recover simultaneously, which is only going to benefit in-season competition, where you have a stronger, more robust, faster athlete who is available for selection because they didn't get injured, because they were doing things like BFR to prepare tendons and structures. So for me, it seems like the future of recovery in preseason is going to be with BFR alongside.
Just looking ahead into the season then, how do you see that changing? Because obviously when we've gone through the preseason period, we're then picking up regular fixtures. again, recovering now between games rather than maybe preseason sessions or preseason games? What do you see the difference being going into the season, how that can be utilized?
So I guess in the preseason, we're looking for adaptations, right? We're looking to drive physiological change in the body. And that's a great thing that BFR allows you to do while recovering. Whereas in season, we're primarily focusing on optimizing recovery, right, for the next performance, particularly with quick turnarounds. Obviously, all eyes are on how can we recover these athletes quicker in terms of substrate, muscle glycogen resynthesis, muscle structure rebuilding, and all those lovely types of things. So recovery turns more to actually getting the athlete ready to perform again as opposed to adaptation. So I would be promoting BFR on not necessarily a daily basis, but almost a daily basis of some kind of utility. And it could just be passive. It could just be like a daily reset. Like, let's flush inflammation from the body. Let's drive muscle protein synthesis, upwards, upregulate muscle protein synthesis. Let's reperfuse tissues with the nutrients from the meal that we've just consumed, and just make sure that athlete every single day is more prepared for the next day. So again, there is a periodized model that we've created. I don't know if you've seen it. I can send it in. But we look at what the key component of that day is. Are you heavy and sore? Are you stiff? What is the critical component of that day? And that will dictate how you apply BFR. So heavy and sore, get in the ice, right? Just get in the ice with BFR, sorry, because the BFR will enhance the ice. If you're simply stiff, move with BFR, walk, do some stretching mobility with BFR, maybe active BFR on a bike. So we would periodize how we implement the BFR throughout the week. So I like to think about BFR as the magnifier, the adjunct to something else. You're on a bike to get the legs moving, do BFR at the same time to enhance that. You're in the ice bath to reduce soreness, do BFR at the same time to enhance that. So BFR isn't one thing, it's an adjunct to many different things to help support the actual thing you're trying to achieve. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
cool.
100%. No, again, it ties into what we're saying, isn't it? Because then you're not having to, from a coach's perspective, you're not changing too much in terms of what you've set out for your players, are you? It's still, especially if they've been through a preseason at a club before, or they've been through a season at the same club, they kind of know what's coming. They might be settled and comfortable with that, and you're not changing much apart from the fact that you're strapping in for three times 5 minutes on whatever tool that you're utilizing. So I love it, and I love the information that's coming out, and I have seen that, and I think it's great. It's really simple for players and coaches to understand and apply. Is there anything I know you mentioned about the ice baths, and when we recorded the previous podcast, the second one, I think the study was either just starting at that point or it was before the study possibly, and we did refer to it. But is there anything that key that sort of came out of that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I should have listened to the previous episodes so we don't re-go over old grounds. But yeah, it's finished. It was really positive. So just kind of a brief overview. It was over 6 competitive fixtures, Oxford United Football Club, 6 competitive fixtures, matched pairs, crossover design. So everyone was matched to someone positionally, and they did a different condition on the recovery day, so we could compare them internally and between the group. And everyone was exposed to each condition twice. So the conditions were BFR alone for recovery, ice alone for recovery, and BFR applied in the ice. So the combination. And what Oxford found was BFR alone was slightly more advantageous than ice alone for muscle soreness, joint pain, and fatigue. But the combination was off the scale. It was almost twofold as impactful as both of the others. So again, I mentioned before the mechanisms that I perceive to be the mechanisms for it makes sense logically, but the research isn't published on the mechanisms, but this is what I think. And it's the cold shock proteins. Of course, we already have a lot of evidence on the benefits of those for recovery, but then the addition of BFR creating swelling. So we're going to trigger muscle protein synthesis. When we unstrap, we're going to have a powerful flush, which would not be present with ice alone because you're not creating pressure from the blood. So you get the removal of inflammatory markers and waste, and you also get the reperfusion. So those fresh nutrients driven into tissues, and capillary refill, which happens after ice baths too, but it's very slow, It's very quick because of the BFR. Now, what we're doing in the next study is actually looking at inflammatory markers. So yeah, perceptually, subjectively, athletes definitely feel better. There was a lot of data there. And the way it was ran was very good, match pairs crossover design. But we need to know physiologically, is there an inflammatory change? Is creatine kinase reduced? Is interleukin-6 reduced? Are all these markers of inflammation and recovery actually improved? We don't know. It could be purely perceptual, but we're looking at that and we're going to find out, because that would be pretty cool. If we can show both subjective and objectively, this is definitely better. It's game changing again. Why would you not do BFR in the ice bath if you have an ice bath, right? That's kind of the point.
Yeah, definitely. You dropped a little teaser a few times now. Talk to us about NASA.
Yeah, brilliant. So NASA and an unnamed space agency, we'll say at this point, through NDA. But yeah, this is pretty crazy. Pinch me type moment. So we're going to space with NASA on a mission soon. Just need to be careful on what I say. Soon, very soon, this month. The product will be taken to do research in space on BFR for fluid shift, which is basically space sickness. So the fluid goes to the top of the head, top of the body. You get intraocular pressure, you get intracranial pressure, and it can cause irreversible damage and sickness. Excuse me. So if you do BFR on a low grade, you can reduce that. You can pull the fluid down the body, so you mitigate that problem. If you go on a slightly higher setting with Hytro, we will be able to train with BFR in space. If you go on a slightly higher setting again, you will be able to recover with BFR in space. And obviously in space, you atrophy, you lose bone mineral density, you lose muscle tissue density. Well, muscle tissue in general, you just atrophy. So we can offset that and mitigate it by doing BFR. Also, you could use like a resistance band for like they've got internal tensile qualities. Instead of having 0G where you can't like pull a weight, you will have internal tensile qualities. So you can do BFR with a resistance band in space. And think how much money that saves. They're flying up pieces of equipment which cost tens of millions of dollars, and to fly it up costs a further tens of millions of dollars. All you need is a Hytro pair of shorts and tee in your backpack and a resistance band. It's nuts. And that's why they've expedited us onto this mission to do testing, because they're looking to the future. They're looking for the future of mankind off Earth and how they can mitigate those issues with simple products. Now, you couldn't do this with traditional BFR because they could combust in high oxygen chambers. So if you have a digital device or a wired or app-based device that could spark, obviously that's very bad news. So they've never been able to do it, but they've always wanted to do BFR in space. And we've made that unlock, which never thought was obviously on the cards for Hytro, but yeah, very, very exciting.
Incredible.
That's crazy, isn't it? That is...
It's nuts. I mean, you guys can say you used Hytro before I went to space, so...
What the fans want to see is Warren using Hytro in space. That's the...
That's got to be like just the PR, isn't it? That's just got to be you, like in a space station, just waving. Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Brighton's going up on one of those things. See, if it gets a bit more commercial, maybe in 10, 15 years, we'll see.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? Mate, just finishes up with future area or current areas of research, future areas of research. What's the, before we do our 4th episode, what's the next steps going to be?
So now we're expanding, obviously, into bigger markets in the US. We would like, and we will be conducting research in all of our key sports. So we've obviously done research in rugby union in the UK, male and female, football, as in soccer, for any Americans listening, males and females. So now we're looking at NFL, NBA, NHL, baseball, all of these sports. We need to answer pressing questions for those sports. So why do we think BFR is going to be of benefit to them? Obviously recovery, but there's always some kind of niche utility in a sport, like baseball pitcher, rotation, rotator cuff injuries, elbow issues. We can look at preparation with BFR with Hytro prior to competition. That's just a specific example. So yeah, more about sport specificity and actually addressing questions for each of those markets. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mentioned before that we're currently in sport and it's the basis and bedrock of everything we do. But the future opportunities in health markets and consumer markets too. So anyone, aging, it's good for reducing atrophy, helping with bone mineral density, helping you walk again, longevity of life, rehab from injury. So that there's so many incredible opportunities because of our products that have been unlocked. And we'll always keep our core in professional sports. That's why it was made. It's why I created this product and set up the business with my co-founders in the first place. But there's a hell of a lot of bigger opportunities that we're starting to address at this present time.
Incredible. Love seeing the growth, mate. I know there's a lot of hard work gone on behind the scenes, so it's great to see literally that rocket ship. It's taking off now. So no, it's really great to see. And just give us any links. Where would you send people? I'm sure a lot of people, if not majority, have heard about Hytro and seen the products, but if they haven't, where would you direct people?
Yeah, just go to hytro.com, go to the website, the pro sports section, get in touch. I think it's team sales at hytro.com. It's on the website. There's also LinkedIn. I'm also always throwing up crazy ideas and hypotheses on there, hypotheses. So please do comment, share, and have a healthy debate on there too. I'm always open to chat. And obviously the social media, Instagram, just at Hytro if you want to take a look.
Perfect. Warren, Jordan, thank you very much.
Cheers.
No,
Pleasure.
thanks, Warren.
Thanks a lot, guys.